you're right about China. I think he's boxed himself in. He can't back down politically because he doesn't like to look weak. But I think the voters are going to render this verdict because we've got a chain of stores here called the Dollar Store. Where do you think all their products come from? Right? China. And it's not going to be the dollar store anymore. It's going to be the $10 store.
Hi, welcome to Superpowers, the future of global security here on Times Radio. Today I'm joined by Chuck Todd, former host of NBC's Meet the Press, but now hosting his own wonderfully successful podcast, the Chuck Todd Cast, that you can listen to on the podcast provider of your choice. Chuck, welcome.
Thank you,
We
sir.
are recording this, and it's become annoyingly necessary to timestamp all content as recorded, such is the pace at which events are moving. But we're recording this on Friday, the 11th of April at lunchtime UK, breakfast time in America, at the end of what has been a tumultuous week as the
Mhm.
markets and the global economy has reacted to Liberation Day. And if we had recorded this on Wednesday, we would have been talking about one thing. If we're talking about it on Thursday, another. If we're talking about it today, we'll be talking about it in the wake of all that has happened, and who knows where we will be tomorrow. So, Chuck, for those of us that are not entirely sure how on earth the American administration is moving at the pace that it is, can you give us your assessment of quite what's happened this week and what on earth might happen next?
Well, look, I think this has been politically catastrophic for him. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an economic expert, other than I feel as if I've been liberated from my savings this week. But look, I think politically this has been near catastrophic for him. I think this is going to turn into uh, the moment like what happened to Joe Biden with the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. Um, it was so damaging to Joe Biden for a couple of reasons. One, this was considered his strength. People thought foreign policy, that's Joe Biden's strength. We can't, he's messing that up. And it was a moment of competence. It was a competence moment. And from then on, he never recovered with a chunk of the public. His approval rating never got over 45%, and we know what happened. It was basically a failed term as president. Well, largely, Donald Trump was elected because the one thing voters thought he was competent about was managing the economy. This was his core strength. Look, plenty of people didn't like his character. Plenty of people were concerned about his foreign policy. Plenty of voters were skeptical of many of his ideas, except this one thought. Well, the economy was pretty good in Trump 1.0. He seems to know what he's doing. This is undermining his core competency. And when you look at the chaotic nature, you now have congressional Republicans more willing to speak out against him on this than any other issue we've had so far. And I think we've all wondered, what is the moment of fracture in the Republican Party? Is it going to be character? No. Was it going to be Putin? No. It's the pocketbook. And I think this is the one that I think he's going to continue to have a harder time keeping his coalition together. And once that happens, everything could unravel on him.
I mean, it seems that Musk is gone now. He is looking for an honourable exit.
Well, I think that's a fair. I love your bluntness on this. I think the more we say, "Oh, he's gone," they'll say, "Oh, no, 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 he's still doing his thing." But it's not lost on me that another headline this week that got lost in the chaos of the tariffs was very quietly all these administration cuts he made to Social Security, right? The single most popular government program in America. Suddenly they're going, "Oh, we're going to bring telephones back and we're going to do this." It's pretty clear there's a lot of, put it this way, a lot of Republicans not in the West Wing are more than happy to see Musk go away.
Interesting. What about some of the other non-core Trump team members? People like Rubio. The tariffs
Mhm.
is an incredible act of foreign policy as much as it is economic policy.
It is, but Rubio's not involved in this at all. And Rubio, in many ways, is still one of Donald Trump's favorites right now. In fact, I was just interviewing another reporter colleague of mine who's pretty tight with the Trump inner circle. Rubio, he loves how Rubio does on TV, right? Rubio and Vance are both the people he counts on to be his spokespeople, to be the ones that can defend things that no one else is good at defending for him. I think when it comes to his economic team, the Treasury Secretary is on the rise, Scott Bessent, and this Peter Navarro has been benched, right? He was the architect of the entire tariff regime. He's the one that economists were mocking for coming up with a calculation that it appears he used ChatGPT to do this. And so he's been relegated to the sidelines for now. Because I'll tell you this, Trump personally loves Navarro because Navarro tells him what he wants to hear. Navarro is the one that sort of tries to create policy out of sort of Trump's sort of gut instincts. But right now, it is the Treasury Secretary because the Treasury Secretary has the ear of the billionaires. And you do need to remember one thing: everybody with a everybody who's worth $500 million or more in America has Trump's cell phone. So they are all calling him, trying to be nice about it. You're such a genius, Mr. President. You don't you're this is your economy. Move it this way. You know, they're trying the kill him with kindness strategy. Bessent has these ears. So I think at some point he'll blink again, but it's probably going to take a few weeks.
I mean, I understand what to credit Trump. I understand exactly what he's trying to do, and I understand the political potency of the message around re-onshoring the economy,
The
creating
goal's
jobs.
popular. You guys went through this with Brexit. The idea of it sounds great.
100. And
How are
I
you
heard
going to
a
implement?
clip of him saying that they're making $2 billion a day already in
Yeah,
tariff receipts. Discuss. I think that's probably worth a fact check. But
yeah,
there's something really seductive around jobs are coming home, America's
right,
economy is going to boom, and I'm going to cut your taxes because all the other countries in the world are going to pay to sell
right.
stuff into America. Like it is a politically incredibly seductive message, and what I think baffles me is that as the impossibility in that message seems to become exposed,
Right.
there's always a line that makes it somebody else's fault, or that they're being
Always.
misrepresented or misunderstood, or it's jam tomorrow, just wait till tomorrow, all be fine. And the voter coalition that he assembled last November, for now, seems to be ready to buy into that.
Well, look, if you look geographically at his support, okay, and if you just look at, and I'm, you know, I'm, when where his strength was, where he won in the swing states. Well, these were the states where global free trade hurt them the most. Okay, I mean, it is not illogical, right? What he's trying to deliver to the voters that gave him the presidency,
Yeah.
right? It is these are the trade deal, you know. But the irony is that while that part of his coalition got hurt by free trade, the Deep South in America actually has been benefiting from the move of factories south.
Yep.
They have, and in fact, where you look at German car companies have factories all over America's Deep South. BMW and Mercedes have factories in Alabama and South Carolina. And guess who's getting harmed by the tariffs? The reddest southern states. So, yes, the coalition that put them over the top is patient with him. This is where JD Vance comes from. This is where all of those things. But the base of the party that has grown financially stronger and more powerful over the last 20 years has been in the Deep South, from Texas to Florida. And those states have benefited enormously from open trade, from free trade. The state of Texas and Mexico. I mean, if you erect more barriers there, Texas will go into a recession almost faster than the country itself. So this is the unique nature of the American economy. It is you can help one region, but literally if you use tariffs to help one region, you actually are harming another group of Americans and another region. Forget the consumer part of it. I'm talking about the business infrastructure part of it. So this is why it feels like it's unsustainable for him politically. These two political coalitions are not going to be able to live together forever.
Tell me that comment you made about every ultra high net worth individual in America has got Trump's mobile number. that is, I mean, it makes sense. He himself is a successful businessman, and he's courted
Oh,
that
he loves it,
audience.
right? That's the deal. Oh, you're going to write me a big check. Here's my phone number. It's
But one
basically for sale.
interpretation of that is there's a sort of new American oligarchy, and that Trump is their agent. Trump is on license to do
Hmm.
as they want. Now, I'm not sure that Trump is anybody's man. He seems to me to be pretty individual and pretty sure of
Yeah.
what he wants to do. But is your sense that the U-turn on tariffs that we saw midweek was because he had sort of run out of license from those who from his billionaire supporters and friends?
Absolutely. But the bond market seemed to be the thing that also finally penetrated his belief system here. That guess what? America not being the reserve currency, and more importantly, right? If our bond market collapses, then we can't refinance our debt at a lower interest rate, just the opposite. We're going to have to refinance at a higher interest rate. So what does that do? That makes him passing tax cuts that much harder.
Yeah.
So all of this, if and this is you're now getting at to how did the Treasury Secretary, excuse me, how did the Treasury Secretary get him to back down? Told him, hey, you're not going to be able to get your tax cut. You're not going to be able to refinance the debt. You're going to have to raise the debt. All of these very unpopular things he doesn't like to think about or do. And so that seemed to at least convince him to do that. And I think it will again. But this gets into what I say is political incompetency by Trump. He's putting his tax cut in major jeopardy. He should have ordered this differently. You do your tax cut first, right? You reward your best customers, right? Reward your base. Give your rich friends their tax cut first, calm them down, give them pad, right? Then you know what's coming in the fall, but give them some sort of warning. And that's what he didn't do. I mean, there's a guy who runs a think tank that basically tries to make Trumpism an intellectually honest argument. And he did a very good job actually in the New York Times. A gentleman by the name of Owen Cass sort of wrote, sympathetic to the idea of what Trump's trying to do and explaining how you could have done it orderly. 30 days you do this, 60 days you do that, 90 days. You give room for business to sort of prepare. You give room for countries to negotiate without the threat of a piano falling on their head. And you ratchet up pressure on China, right? Isolate. If China's the real bad guy here, then focus on China and essentially get your allies on board with you, right? Do this together. And instead, it was like a machine gun where he just sprayed everybody. And suddenly you got the EU going, do we need to partner with China now? And it's not illogical.
So look, I mean that I think is to get to the stock in trade in Superpowers, where we try and look at things from a geopolitical perspective. That is the bit that baffles me. My
Hmm.
sense is that you'll tell me that your average American voter consumer doesn't care. This is about domestic economy, not
Hmm.
global politics.
Right.
But the US runs a surplus in trade against the United Kingdom and yet whacked
Hmm.
it with tariffs. The United
Right.
Kingdom is one of the US's closest allies and one of the people that is, I think, working hardest on the world stage to kind of connect Trump into what remains the world order. The EU, Trump, has this logic that the EU was founded to harm America. That I'm a former Tory politician, and my party has its views on the EU, but that seems unlikely. And the idea that the American and European markets can be disentangled seems odd to me.
Right.
The punishment that Mexico and Canada are on the receiving end of, that feels an odd way to treat your neighbours when they are largely allies.
Right.
Um, and I agree with you that if the principal aim is a strategic sort of geo-economic competition with China, that you want the rest of your friends and allies firmly on side before you embark in
Hmm.
that competition. So none of the geopolitics seem to make much sense,
Right.
but I don't think anybody really cares.
Well, they're gonna, when they're gonna care, and I'm gonna hold up my cup of coffee here. Coffee is going to be, I think, the great symbol. The way for last year it was egg prices, right? We would talk about when it cost them cost of living. But coffee, do you know we only have one state, one of our 50 states that produces coffee beans?
I didn't know.
Hawaii,
Wow.
just Hawaii.
Yeah.
All the other coffee comes from outside of America. It is the one thing that everybody's going to feel. Whether you buy cheap coffee at the gas station or you buy fancy coffee at the Starbucks or anything in between, everybody's going to feel 25 and it will be one of those things that are, in fact, there's a couple of coffee stores in around the capital region that are thinking about adding the words tariff fee on their coffee receipts, in part as a way to make sure customers are educated about it. But I do think this one thing about Americans, they may look, we think these two oceans, we think we're an island, okay? And there's always been this sense we're an island. And we want to, we can hide from the world's problems until we can't, right? And it's one of those things where I think Americans aren't aware of how interconnected the economy is, aren't aware of how interconnected the Canadian economy is. They're going to find out, wait a minute, American cars have tariffs on it because, wait, they go back and forth from Canada. And then you sit there and it's like, wait a minute, Canada? Don't we just drive in a tunnel or a bridge, just show our driver's license and get over it is. So I do think that the illogic of this is what will penetrate the American voter on this. And it goes back to what's the one thing, it's been the one thing through line of American politics in my entire lifetime. It's just how much things cost. And when people think you don't manage the economy well, you're not looking out for them, you're gone. And I just think that this is what Trump has failed, just completely failed to understand. I want to make one more point though on the UK. I do think Trump, because of he has this, he wants to do a deal with the UK simply because he views Brexit as sort of the moment he became legitimate.
Right. Yeah.
It was the moment to say, hey, I knew Brexit was going to happen. He didn't. He just sort of came aboard because they were like minded. But he's viewed it as sort of that was the shot heard around the world. And if it wasn't for Brexit, he's not taken seriously. And so I do think he has this affinity for doing these one on one trade deals and that the UK will get the first trade deal. Whether it's a good one or not, I leave up to you guys. But you will get the first deal.
Well, I mean, and there is something quite entertaining. Again, having sat on the government benches whilst the now government were in opposition and opposing at every step the realities of a US trade deal, to see the government now enthusiastically chasing one is, for me, a sort of encouragement,
Yeah,
albeit a slight despair that they could have supported
sure.
it 5 years ago.
Could have done it when your team was in charge, but
Exactly.
yeah,
I mean, but
yeah,
politics is ever thus.
yeah.
And you're right. I mean, what that trade deal looks like, which sectors of our economy is
Right.
relatively gain versus lose. There are some difficult realities that the UK would want a trade deal that principally advantages our service industry,
Right.
and therefore, and the US would want something that advantages agriculture, consumer electronics. You can see the sectors in which the US is
Yep.
strong, but that's bad news for British farming, and there's all sorts of issues over food standards and things that people get very
Hmm.
excited about. But the government is sort of over a barrel because this 90-day hiatus, whilst it hasn't made any difference to the UK because the 10% floor is what
Was
we
already
were at
there.
in the first place.
Right.
I think the world is on notice that the sort of Damocles that is these tariffs still
Hmm.
hangs over, and if you don't use these 90 days to get the deal, then you're vulnerable. Has the administration got the bandwidth though to do that many deals that quickly?
It's hard to imagine that they do. I mean, it's funny you bring this up. I would say the theme of the coverage today in America has been this, which is most trade deals take years to do.
Yeah.
Forget multilateral trade deals, just one-on-one trade deals. I mean, you look at the three-country trade deal in our continent between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. I mean, the first one took a decade, right? And the renegotiation took two administrations. So, these are not easy things to do. And there's not like there's been a lot of preliminary work at this point. But that's always been the trademark of Trump. Oh, all of this is easy. It's not. He'll do some temporary thing, declare victory, and then literally it's left undone, right? At some point. So I think this is the part where I have a feeling he'll do a singular trade deal with the UK. He'll get one done with Australia, probably with Israel, and then all of a sudden they'll try to just create something that's a bit more, you know, blanket, right?
Yeah.
Try to put something that's more, but a lot of this could be driven by the markets. They very well could end up intervening during these negotiations. I mean, we're speaking right now. Our markets haven't opened yet. I can't imagine, given the retaliatory tariffs that China announced overnight, it's going to be another bad day.
Yeah.
And and a whole weekend of this, and another bad day on Monday. I mean, I don't know if we have 90 days. I'll be
Well,
honest. But
no,
the weakness of the dollar and the weakness of the bond market may make him move faster.
I agree. The difficulty is that the community of nations for whom 90 days applies
Hmm.
are broadly allies, partners, will approach this relatively constructively. I think the EU
I think
and
you're right.
like many
And
countries
and if you
are.
told me that there's another 90-day pause, right, to buy more time, we could be there may be pauses for the rest of his term, right, with the friendliest of nations.
But the thing that is driving the bond markets, the stock markets, is the competition with China.
Yep.
And I think that he's marched himself to the top of the hill on that. I cannot see how that de escalates because neither she nor Trump will want to seem to have lost and given in.
No, and she doesn't have, I I teach a class of young college students that are interning in Washington about how Washington works is what the class is called. And I always say for some people, right, is my addendum there.
Yeah.
But I asked them a simple question. I said, between this China standoff between Xi and Trump, I said, what does Xi have that Trump doesn't? No term limits, right? She doesn't have to worry about any sort of vote of no confidence from his Politburo. He doesn't have to worry about voter discontent. He may have to worry about it if workers don't show up, but it's not like he has political problems that will explode on him sooner rather than later. It could happen down the road. Don't get me wrong. And in fact, this is my disappointment in our China policy. I think I think doing nothing was we were winning and they were losing. He has major problems in his middle class. He has major problems in his housing market. We just bailed him out because now he can blame America for all of China's economic problems.
Yeah.
He can rally the country, and again, he has no term limits. Donald
Yeah.
Trump, meantime, we've got our midterm elections, and I'll tell you, I do think if he really doesn't let up on this come those midterm elections, even if Democrats only win one of the two houses of Congress, the Senate Republicans with Democrats in the House will take his tariff authority away. This does not belong to him. He has declared it using a national emergency, very questionable constitutional powers in order to levy these tariffs. Congress has every right to take these powers back. Right now, they're just afraid to cross Donald Trump because it's Republicans in charge. But I think that I don't, you're right about China. I think he's boxed himself in. He can't back down politically because he doesn't like to look weak. But I think the voters are going to render this verdict because we've got a chain of stores here called the Dollar Store. Where do you think all their products come from?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? China. And it's not going to be the dollar store anymore. It's going to be the $10 store.
Yeah. Does it wait until the voters get their say? Is there a? You mentioned earlier on in our discussion that
Hmm.
the congressional conference is starting to feel the pain of
Hmm.
the economic measures. You said they will ride out all of the personal traits, they'll ride out all of the
Right.
culture wars, they'll ride out all of the foreign policy. But when it comes to the economy, they mobilize. I heard a clip from his address to the Republican Congressional Conference the other day. I mean, he seemed pretty bullish, but I've been
Yeah.
in meetings in the UK Parliament with the British Prime
Sure.
Minister, and the leader has to sort of exude confidence and
Hmm.
certainty in what they're doing. But when you when does the Republican Congressional Party mobilize? It surely can't wait till polling day.
No, it can't wait that long. But you see these little moments, right? We've had some various special elections. Republicans have been underperforming. You've sort of seen it all over. We'll have a few off year elections that are held in very prominent media markets,
Yeah.
New York City, New Jersey, state of Virginia, in the White House's backyard. And if all of those go more decidedly Democratic, these are certainly bluish areas, but more decidedly Democratic, you're already seeing little things. House Republicans will decide not to seek reelection. They'll start to look for another office to run for, get out of the House. It's these little things that become, it's like a little chinks in the armor, one by one by one. The panic, I think, sets in if this starts to disrupt his ability to get a tax cut.
Yeah.
And that is the other thing he's trying to do. And, he wants to get this done before the end of the summer. I don't think that's going to happen because the longer this goes, all of a sudden you're going to have some new demands. I talked about the issue in the Midwest on the factory side. Well, the other half of the Midwest is our agricultural base, okay? And the farm states are already feeling the heat when he got rid of USAID, right? USAID, our soft power, was a huge financial lifeline to our farmers, right? Our excess wheat in the state of Kansas was being sold to AID so it could be used to feed hungry people all over the world. And we get rid of that. All of a sudden, that's a government subsidy that those farmers don't have anymore. Now you've got other countries raising tariffs on our agricultural exports. So they're now getting hit twice. And now Republicans are going to ask for essentially welfare subsidies for these farmers who have lost all this income while he's trying to do a tax cut with other fiscal conservatives who don't believe in government handouts. So I just think this whole thing, if you're asking when is there going to be a pressure point before polling day, it's when he comes to this conclusion that in order to get his tax cut, he's going to have to throw all these handouts, which we don't have the money for. And it's all due to his erratic tariff policy.
The the challenge or the interesting thing, I mean, challenge depends on which side of the political spectrum you sit. But the
Hmm.
interesting thing is that fundamentally, the Democrats are still nowhere as a coherent and
No,
credible opposition. Now, it may
not
well
yeah.
be
Yeah,
that the
they
impact,
may not have to be. They could just we're not them,
we're
right?
not
You
them.
saw it in your party. I don't
Yeah.
know if the Labor Party's recovered as far as the public's concerned. It's just at some point the chaos of the Tories were like, all right, guys, enough. The Liz Truss business. Yeah, you lost your credibility.
Yeah.
But look at how damaged the Labor Party was for so long that it took how chaotic did things have to get for the Tories for voters to finally hand power back to Labor? And that's what I think the Democrats ought to fear here is it does the voters turn to a more rational Republican before they will turn to the Democrats? I think for now, if you actually look at our politics, we've not been voting for anything in 15 years. We've been voting against. We know what we don't want. We didn't want Hillary Clinton. We didn't want Trump. We didn't want Biden and Harris. So I do think Democrats will benefit simply by not being them, but they're divided on tariffs themselves,
Yeah.
right? There's still a part of the Democratic Party that's, the protectionist wing of that party. And then you have this business tech wing on the center left, very similar to sort of, I guess I would, and forgive me if I'm being too simplistic here, Jeremy Corbyn versus a Tony Blair, right?
Yeah.
Like, that split on your left, very similar to I think the splits we have in our left of center party as well.
Although I understand the parallel you make, I mean, but fundamentally, Blair was an incredibly successful politician with the electorate.
Absolutely.
Corbyn, not so. There was a ceiling to
Exactly.
Corbyn's support.
And
I
I
mean,
think our far left has that same ceiling.
yeah, but my sense is that the Democrats haven't yet come to terms with how to be, at the very least, as Keir Starmer was, vanilla
Mhm.
enough to just be not them.
It's 100% true.
But
We need to find
and
our vanilla ice cream.
yeah, I mean, you've got to make a decision to do that in order to,
Right.
by all means, don't advance a credible definition of what it is
But
to be a
James,
Democrat in
Joe Biden was
2026.
vanilla ice cream.
Yeah,
Joe Biden was vanilla ice cream, and
yeah,
people didn't like it.
yeah. Well, then there is this situation in which, for all of the angst, for all of the turmoil, for everybody looking at, is it their 401ks that everybody in America obsesses
Yeah.
about?
Yes,
For
it is.
everybody looking at those and despairing, there isn't a credible alternative, and you can see how in off-year elections and even in midterms, you can make a protest. But
Correct.
come the next election, it feels like, unless the Republicans have dusted themselves down, sorry, the Democrats have
Right.
dusted themselves down and come up with an alternative message, it becomes all about the Republican primary and
Correct.
who challenges Vance.
Right. If you asked me today, I would probably put my money on a gentleman named Glenn Youngkin on the
Okay.
Republican side. He's the governor of Virginia. He's a billionaire. Was CEO of one of the more successful, one of the first private equity firms in the Washington D.C. area called the Carlyle Group, and he is somebody that has figured out. He's sort of very pro business, sort of more of a traditional, closer to Mitt Romney and a George W. Bush,
Yeah.
but has governed MAGA enough. If you get my drift, right, has sort of done just enough. He was on the short list for Trump's VP. Look, I think it was always going to be Vance, but Trump kept Youngkin around because he likes rich guys. All right, he loves when rich guys suck up to him. So I could see Youngkin. He's shown an ability though to be a little more of a traditional Republican. But look, on the Democratic side, I keep saying Tony Blair, our Tony Blair is Bill Clinton,
Yeah.
right? Our version of that was Bill Clinton, and in many ways, right? Bill Clinton was sort of the godfather of Tony Blair, right? The two of them,
Yeah.
I feel like were ideological soulmates.
Yes.
Taking their old dusty left wing parties and turning them into modern pro business center left parties. That's what the Democratic Party is lacking, right? And I think there's some governors that are auditioning to be that. And I think it's going to be interesting. There'll be a big fight between our left wing. It could be an AOC who I think Bernie Sanders does see her as his heir apparent. But I think there's a ceiling there. I do think you have enough Democratic Party donors that are looking for some combination of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and are fearful of a Bernie Sanders or a Joe Biden.
So if we fast forward 3 years,
Hmm.
and you said to me when we were just sort of getting to know each other earlier that there's only 1,000 days to go.
Just 1,000, yeah. We haven't even gotten to 100 days. Like, can you imagine how? As I said, we're about 80 days. Let's look at it this way: we have
Yeah.
12 more chunks of 80-day periods to go. Okay.
And Chuck, you would despair to know that I have been over the last month or two in some pretty punchy, high caliber conferences and
Yeah.
meetings when, frankly, the answer to all of the world's current geopolitical woes is it's only another 3 years.
Yeah.
But but I think the world will change profoundly in those 3 years, and
Yeah.
therefore, there's the world is going to have to adjust to the fact that Trump is the democratically elected leader of the
Yeah.
United States. He is
Let,
delivering
let
on
me throw a
nothing more of
scenario
what
at you,
he said
James.
he would do.
Let me throw a scenario at you. I'm just curious of your reaction. In 6 months, there's a great trilateral summit between Xi, Putin, and Trump. How will Europe react to that? How will the UK react to that?
With profound concern, and I think that already feels
Doesn't
like
it feel like that's going to happen?
where
Right?
we're
You could
at.
just
Yeah.
see that's coming.
Well,
Maybe it'll be on nuclear arms. They'll come up with, but Trump sees himself, and he does see Putin and Xi as equals, and he sees himself as a sphere of influence, and he sees Europe and he sees the UK as small allies.
yeah.
He does not view them as equals.
So I've
Only
heard
Putin
that
is an equal.
many, many times. And Putin has this view that there are countries in the world that decide what they want to do, and countries
That's
in
right.
the world that have to accept what they're told is going to happen.
Right.
And I think that Trump has exactly the same view of the world,
I
the
do too.
same view of global statesmanship, and fundamentally, although Putin presides over a not a top table
Hmm.
economy, no longer a top table military, really either. The fact
Hmm.
is that Putin still projects himself in that way, and Trump, to the frustration of everybody who's been
Hmm.
working to marginalize Putin over the last few years following the outrage in Ukraine, it is Trump's reaction to Putin that puts Putin back at that top table again. Xi undeniably is there. Of course he is. He's the president
Hmm.
of the world's other superpower alongside the United States. But if that threesome was to become a thing, I think it had profound consequences for
I do too.
America's friendships with the UK, with Europe, Japan,
Hmm.
Australia. Not that any of those countries turn their back on the United States,
No.
but I think it forces those countries to no longer bank on the United States having their back and the United States being on the same page at them in global fora and around big
Right.
international decisions. And that is a turning of the page in history.
It is, and it would probably take us at least two generations of political leaders and of consistent uh, uh, pro small d democracy behavior for us to get our to get the Western world back together again.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. That I think it's that lost
And
potentially.
to the world at large,
Hmm.
that keeps people awake at night. I mean, that there are, this.
It's a form of Darwinism. I think we're all going to be sort of survival of, everybody's going to have to just survive and advance
But
day
if
by
in
day.
the United States, if the only thing that moves the dial is no concern over the role the United States plays in the world, no concern. I mean, interestingly, you mentioned earlier on the dollar as the reserve currency, the dollar as the default currency for global trade.
Hmm.
I wonder if that's the sort of loss of prestige that would move the dial within America. But if fundamentally it is solely about domestic politics, then the rest of us can gnash our teeth, wring our hands, but
Right.
fundamentally nothing will change.
It is. Look. I'm going to confess. I'm a free trader. Okay. I'm a believer in markets. I'm a believer in capitalism. You know, there's this great story that George Will, uh, I heard him tell one time about, the folks that were trying to save the block of ice workers and were trying, in the late 19th century as refrigeration was becoming more and more of a thing. Well, how do we save this wonderful industry? We got to save these jobs of the guys that break off the big blocks of ice. And this is how things work. And this idea that you can turn back the clock. I mean, I'll tell you this. I was speaking to a group of Fortune 500 executives earlier this week, and they had received some concerning news from a survey of international consumers. There's a rise in anti-Americanism,
Yeah.
right? And there's a fear now of boycotts of American companies that you will start to see, and you're going to have. I mean, these tariffs are going to put small businesses out of business around the world, and there are going to be some angry people about that. And I don't think we have fully. This is, we got a bit of taste of anti-Americanism during the Iraq War. I don't think we've seen it. Again, I go back to when you hit somebody's pocketbook, the reaction is even rawer. It's
Well,
even
and
angrier.
the way we
And I think
consume
that's
our,
going to happen.
I
Yeah.
agree, but the way that we consume our media now
Hmm.
compared to 2003 is very
Yeah.
different.
That's
And
true.
that anti-Americanism that you fear will be peddled relentlessly by
Hmm.
Russia, China, and Iran, particularly
Oh,
China.
oh, and they're
And
going to feed it in European media markets and all over
100%.
the globe. Yeah.
100%. Look, we're running out of time. I could
Yep.
probably sit and talk to you all day, to be honest,
We
because it's
should do it again.
fascinating. And
We'll
and
do a
and,
home
and
and away. I got to get you on my podcast. We'll
every,
talk UK
well,
politics.
look, every British politician's dirty secret is they're obsessed with US presidential politics.
Yeah.
But the thing I want to put to you last, Chuck, is a month ago it
Hmm.
was all about Ukraine, the peace deal. We had that big bust up in the Oval Office. You know,
Yeah.
in any normal year, that would have teed up a really quite sensational series of events lasting the year that rewrote the
Yeah.
world order, may or may not have brought peace in Ukraine. But a month later, we're hardly talking about it because we've had
Right.
Liberation Day and the tariffs,
Right.
and that now dominates. I just wonder if there is another outrage to come. Netanyahu left the
There
White
always
House, I
is.
think, feeling pretty happy. There's an interesting build-up of US hardware in Diego Garcia.
Hmm.
Are we going to find that this Trump that the tariffs outrage lasts for barely a month because in a month's time something enormous
No,
has happened in Iran?
I think no. I look, I'm not saying that there won't be flashpoints of something else that dominates. Maybe it's Iran, but I go back to my cup of coffee. I think the pain, the economic pain is something. This is not a fleeting story. And I think the day-to-day consumer pain that's coming. Look, it's a lagging, right? It'll come. It's probably going to be 3 months from now where the real price increases happen. But that's what I think is going to be. It's going to be drip, drip, drip of pain. That's what happened to Biden, right? With inflation, it was stubborn, right? This is going to be stagflation, right? It's going to be rising prices and lost savings. That's going to be. I think it's. I don't think any bombing of Iran distracts for more than a second.
Chuck, what a depressing note to leave it on, but what a
I know.
fascinating conversation it's been. I
Yep.
suspect that, like me, everybody who's
Right.
watched you over the last 40 minutes will be off to immediately subscribe to the Chuck Todd cast,
Well,
which you can
there you
get
go.
from the podcast provider of your choice.
Appreciate it,
For more of Chuck's wisdom, Chuck, really fantastic to speak to you. Thank
James.
you
This
for
was
sparing
awesome.
us the time. Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
for watching Superpowers here on Times Radio, the future of global security. For more of Times Radio's brilliant geopolitical commentary, make sure you subscribe to the Times Radio channel. For now, goodbye.